welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the debut author of a fascinating and riveting novel about the high-stakes world of finance of Wall Street. It's an absolutely fascinating journey, and I am so excited to have this conversation. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Well, thanks, Jen. My name is Ken Miller, and I am the author of a recently released novel called High Finance, which is available on Amazon and a lot of bookstores and libraries. High Finance is the story of a kind of greedy young man who comes to Wall Street and decides to get rich by joining Lehman Brothers and seeing how many shares of Lehman he can acquire. And because the reader knows that the '08 crash triggered by the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers is in his future, you have the fun of watching this rather unadmirable character deal with the impending doom that he doesn't know about. Actually, the cover of the book is a picture, really a conception of him on the day he learns he's ruined. And then the last three chapters, the third to the end is called The Fall. In the second to the end, you hear from his wife. And in the third, which is called The Cope, you see what happens when a multi-millionaire has to move from a, multi-bedroom duplex on Park Avenue to a rental in Patchogue, which is here on Long Island with us. So that's a good, I think, summary of the novel. It's a fun read, I hope. It was sure fun to write it. And I hope that the reader, while it's not didactic, does get a real sense of the culture of Wall Street, because the protagonist, Jed, is seen from so many different points of view, but you're in there in the inner sanctum by the time you've finished the book.
It's a fascinating glimpse of this world that really is a very high stakes pressure cooker for individuals and for companies. It's extraordinary. It is fun to read, but it's also stressful if you are an empathetic reader. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your career and your journey as an author. Obviously, your career in finance has influenced the themes and the plot of the book here, but I'm curious if they have contributed in any way you think to your craft or to the business of writing.
I would say not. I mean, I had to write memos and presentations when I was a big wheel on Wall Street. But I go back. I'm going to give you a quick once over of the really crazy journey that took me to publishing a debut novel at a very advanced age. I started on the south side of Chicago, as did the character who's the protagonist of this book. I had a great high school English teacher, Miss Annan, who was one of the few PhDs in the Chicago public school system. And she beat the hell out of us, teaching us to write. And before that, I learned to read on comic books. So I've always liked that, pow and thwack and, some of the unsubtle aspects of life. But I got educated and I got involved in the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. And by the time I graduated Harvard Law School, I had a master's degree in Chinese studies, and I founded a firm to invest in Black businesses. And that was early stage venture capital, and that's where I learned how to do that. And early stage venture led me to Wall Street. I got there just as mergers and acquisitions was taking off. And it was taking off in the context of hostile tender offers, where people would attack these corporations and try to take them over without the approval of their management. In fact, the nickname for that M&A business was murders and accusations. But I did the murders and accusations for about 10 years, and it is a pressure cooker. You, as an agent for these big corporations, are on a short leash. You might get a phone call at 11 o'clock at night saying you need to be in, El Paso the next morning or London or whatever. And the deal has a life of its own, and it's an unforgiving master. And so I did that for a while, and I became part of the senior management of Merrill Lynch, where I was vice chairman, and Credit Suisse First Boston, where I was also vice chairman. And then I kind of moved to the easier business of early stage venture, where I helped young entrepreneurs get going. And from there, well, throughout this whole process, I was publishing a lot of nonfiction in, Foreign Affairs magazine, and I had a cover story for Time. Merrill Lynch encouraged that kind of action. So I honed my writing skills there, but I was always writing fiction. I loved storytelling. We all need stories to escape from the actual problems of our real lives. And so Jed's problems in high finance are ones that we can revel in because A, he's not that likable, and B, they're not our problems. So yeah, writing it was a total gas. The writing took place in the interstices of my time over many years. But this is my first novel, and one of the chapters is about a character named Bobby Cherubini, the internal auditor at Lehman, who's trying to bust Jed, for the protagonist, for trading on inside information. And in this next novel, which is called The Ferret, he will have his own problems, which are somewhat revealed in high finance.
I'd love to know more about Jed and went into shaping him as a character, without throwing anybody under any buses. Is he a composite figure? How shaped is he by your daily experience of your career?
Well, he, I learned a lot being on Wall Street about how people think about money. And when we talk about money here, I've noticed that the word billions crept into the public discourse several years ago, and now it's trillions all of a sudden. But I did the biggest deal ever at the time. I think it was like $13 billion when I sold Gulf Oil to Chevron. But the characters are really amalgams of traits that I observed. There's no one who's real. I think if you were at Lehman, a lot of former Lehman bankers have read the book by now, and they may recognize that, a trait from this person or that person. For example, there's a scene where the young Jed walks into the office of a guy who's a big wheel in the oil and gas department, and he's practicing his putting with one of those machines that pops a ball back to you. Well, that really happened. And then there's a whole chapter called The Informant, about a shoeshine guy who is a black man who moves around the halls of Lehman almost invisibly. People I remember I actually went in to get interviewed by a big wheel at a big firm, and he's talking to me, and the shoeshine guy comes in and starts shining his shoes while we're talking. It was so cringe-inducing, but that's the kind of thing as a writer, I could remember and use. So, no, Jed, I myself, Jed sells fire extinguishers as a young boy. I actually did that myself. So I knew a lot about selling fire extinguishers door to door, and I used that. So that became part of Jed. I hope that I avoided every one of Jed's very bad traits, but it's fun to create them and impose them on a fictional character.
Oh, absolutely. So it covers the time period from the 1970s through the Lehman Brothers crash, as you've mentioned, and beyond. Did I'm curious if you went back to re-examine this period of your career or of sort of the history of the industry, and did it yield any new insights for you? Do you think you learned anything about your experiences or about that moment in time just from the process of revisiting and fictionalizing it?
Well, I myself, my first job on the street after I stopped investing in black businesses was at Lehman Brothers. And I was there only 9 months. I came to realize that the more senior you got, the more you hated your partners. But I came back many years later as a senior advisor after being vice chair at these two other firms. And I left about a year and a half before the bankruptcy of Lehman. And in terms of what I learned, I've been working on an article about the persistence of this amazing bonus system, which is the beating heart of high finance, where the banker is paid a huge multiple of their base for creating revenue for the firm. And that system persists, and it's persisting in an atmosphere of radical deregulation. So for people who care about the real world, I mean, as I say, this is not an attempt to teach anybody anything, but rather to amuse them. But I have learned, I was a perpetrator of that. I mean, I handed out bonuses to prima donnas who maybe, got a check for $1 million and were outraged because somebody next to them got a check for $1.1 million. So you get, New York is the capital of too much ain't enough. And I got to observe that up close and personal, both as a perpetrator and a victim. But, it's hard to sympathize with a victim who is making that kind of money. I understand that.
You've talked a little bit about the structure of the novel. Each chapter is sort of from the perspective of a different person with whom Jed interacts throughout the course of this period. I'm curious about choosing that structure and how that shaped, perhaps what you wanted to explore in his character arc, or what that let you express about his personality or his choices.
Well, I love novels that go deep into the interiority of a person. And there are chapters where you're inside Jed's mind, but you mainly learn about Jed from what he does and doesn't do and what he says and doesn't say. But the multifaceted, it's a little like Rashomon or some of these famous Japanese movies where you think you know the story, but then you see it from a completely different point of view. So the least connected chapter to the fundamental plot is the one I would call collateral damage, where a telephone repairman that Jed befriends, or who befriends Jed in Harvard Square, ultimately calls him for advice on how to invest his life savings. And Jed, who himself has made a huge bet with borrowed money on Lehman stock, tells this guy to do the same thing. And he's not the only perspective that's offered. You see Jed from the point of view of his British secretary, his Marxist brother, this internal auditor I mentioned, and so forth. So I thought it would be more fun to shine the light on Jed from in 11 different chapters from various points of view. But the thread of who Jed is and the final, I would say, insight or reveal of who he is in the last chapter is told from all these different points of view. And I thought that would be a promising way to structure the work.
Yeah, I think it gets you inside his head, but it also allows you to, I think about like the performativity of various parts of his job and his sort of daily experience and how we are all these different cells really throughout the course of our day, depending on who we're interacting with, what we need, what we want, things like that. It really is a very complex portrait.
Well, thank you. I mean, I love authors like Anita Brookner, who, where, all of a sudden you become a British spinster, or Elena Ferrante, if that's the real author, where all of a sudden you're a young Neapolitan girl. And there's a lot of like inside the mind aspects there. I didn't pick up the technique of being able to use italics to show that you were actually inside the mind of someone until many years after I began writing. I just enjoyed all these novels without paying too much attention to their authors' techniques. But then at a certain point, I began studying them. And I do like the structure of High Finance, but my next book will be a more traditional structure where the plot unfolds, yes, from different points of view, but not quite as radically as in High Finance.
Interesting. So this next book, is it associated but disconnected? Is it like a proper sequel or prequel? What is it that you have planned?
I would call it a spin-off.
Mm.
Bobby Cherubini, the internal auditor of Lehman Brothers, is trying to nail Jed for insider trading, but at the same time, he's kind of a sex addict, and he's paying $10,000 a night for very expensive prostitutes, and eventually has to steal from his own. He's finally fired at Lehman thanks to Jed's successful outmaneuvering him. And in the next novel, if it is the next novel, because there's a horse race between that novel, which is in the can and needs edit, and another one I'm working on. But if that is the next novel, it may be called The Ferret. You never know as you go through the publication process. But in that novel, this internal auditor ends up in prison for his embezzlement, and with an Orthodox Jewish woman founds a new world religion. So it's much more fanciful and speculative, but it's also more traditional, structurally speaking.
Oh, it sounds so interesting.
It's a spin-off. It's not a sequel.
Oh, very cool. Well, I look forward to seeing that as well. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and our listeners, and I'm very excited to recommend this book to folks at the library.
Super.
Okay, listeners, please check out High Finance. It is out now in the world. It will continue to be out when you hear this in early January. So you can head to your favorite library or bookstore website. Do you have a place that you like to send people for books?
Well, not particularly. It's available in hardback, ebooks, and audiobooks. I'm very proud of the audiobook. I think it's very nicely narrated and with some nice musical interstitials. And I got to say, my main hope for the readers is that it's a fun read and you'll look for my next one.
Excellent. All right, there is your homework, listeners. Thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.